You really think that car is worth anything? Rebecca's words cut through the morning air like a cold breeze sliding under a door, and I felt it before I even registered it consciously. I'm Ethan Parker, 36, average height, hands calloused from years of working on engines and lifting parts in my garage, a man who values function over flash. My old truck, a faded 2004 Ford F-150, sat parked in the driveway, its once bright red paint now dulled by sun and rain, tires a little worn, exhaust wheezing gently in the crisp September morning. Rebecca leaned against the hood with that practiced, dismissive smirk she wore as effortlessly as perfume, crossing her arms while her friends from the neighborhood barbecue cluster nearby laughed softly, like they were all in on a joke I had yet to understand. I took a deep breath, felt the coffee from my travel mug warm my hands, and told myself it didn't matter, that pride doesn't need to scream to exist. But the sting of her words settled deep, twisting quietly into a coil of humiliation and frustration I couldn't shake. I glanced at the truck, running my fingers along the worn door handle, remembering the nights I spent tuning the engine, the early mornings driving to work while she slept, the countless trips to Home Depot and the grocery store, all of it silent, unseen, just part of a life I thought we shared. Rebecca laughed again, that soft, controlled laugh that somehow manages to make everyone feel superior, and I felt the familiar ache of invisibility. She didn't see the man who had stayed up late fixing the brakes when the brake lines failed on a Friday night. She didn't see the man who had saved every penny to make sure our vacations were steady, predictable, comfortable. To her, it was just an old truck, a symbol of mediocrity, of the mundane life she apparently despised. The children played quietly in the yard, oblivious to the tension hanging between the adults, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the sharpness of her tone. I straightened, rolling my shoulders back, letting the weight of years and responsibilities settle firmly behind me, a quiet reminder that humiliation was temporary, but character was permanent. The morning sun glinted off the cracked windshield, catching the dust in a way that made the truck appear almost regal if you allowed it a second's thought, and I let my mind drift. Not to anger, not to revenge yet, just to possibilities. The world didn't need to see my irritation. It wasn't a performance. It was the seed of something slower, more deliberate, something that would unfold in its own time, quietly, irreversibly. I sipped my coffee again, the bitterness grounding me, reminding me that patience had always been part of who I am. As the laughter of Rebecca and her friends faded into the distance of small talk and clinking glasses, a plan, subtle but insistent, began to form in the corners of my mind. Not a loud declaration, not a confrontation that would satisfy momentary pride, but a slow, steady movement toward proving value beyond opinion, beyond derision. I could feel it, a quiet energy coiling in my chest, a measured confidence that didn't require acknowledgement from anyone present. The F-150, scratched and dented, had become more than a vehicle. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to hours, effort, and skill that no casual glance could measure. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and morning dew, the neighborhood street quiet but for the distant hum of passing cars, and I let that quiet seep into me, sharpening my focus. Rebecca straightened, adjusting her hair, and in that single motion, her pride, her dismissive attitude, all the external weight of judgment, met the unspoken resolve growing inside me. I didn't reply, didn't defend, didn't even glance her way as I let the moment pass, because the real story wasn't here, in the laughter or the insult. It was waiting, quiet, in the hours and opportunities ahead. The old truck sat in its driveway, faithful, worn, uncelebrated, and in that silence, I made a promise to myself that one day, it wouldn't just be a truck, and it wouldn't just be a lesson in endurance. It would be the starting point of something they couldn't ignore, a statement written not in words but in action, in authority, in a world where the tables would turn with a certainty that even her mockery couldn't anticipate. By the time the last guest left that afternoon, the driveway looked normal again, but I did not feel normal. The folding chairs were stacked against the fence, the cooler was half empty, and the smell of charcoal still hung over the backyard like the ghost of a party everyone else enjoyed. Rebecca moved through the kitchen humming softly, pleased with herself, wiping down the counter as if nothing had happened. That was always her gift. She could cut a man open with a sentence, then move on to dessert like the wound belonged to somebody else. I carried the trash bags to the curb, one in each hand, listening to the low rattle of my old Ford cooling in the driveway. The truck had not done anything wrong. It had started every morning, hauled lumber through winter storms, carried groceries, paint cans, patio furniture, and once, a broken water heater that weighed more than common sense should allow. It had been reliable in a world where reliability rarely got applause. Maybe that was why her joke bothered me more than it should have. She had not just mocked the truck. She had mocked the years behind it, the choices behind it, the kind of man who kept something running instead of throwing it away because the neighbors bought shinier things. I went into the garage and turned on the yellow overhead light. It buzzed once, then steadied. My tools hung along the pegboard in clean rows. Socket sets, wrenches, torque bars, a timing light my father gave me when I was 16. The garage smelled like motor oil, sawdust, and old cardboard, and for the first time all day, I could breathe. I ran my hand along the truck's fender, feeling the dull paint under my palm. A few scratches. A small dent near the wheel well. Evidence of use, not failure. Rebecca came to the doorway with a glass of iced tea in her hand. She looked at me the way a person looks at a hobby they tolerate. "Ethan," she said, "you cannot honestly be upset about that." It was a joke. I turned the wrench in my hand once, slow. "I am not upset," I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm. Too calm, maybe. She leaned against the doorframe. "Then stop acting like somebody insulted your mother. Everyone knows. That truck is embarrassing." I looked at her then. Really looked. The soft cream sweater, the neat hair, the wedding ring flashing under the garage light, the expression that said she had already decided my feelings were excessive. I remembered when she used to sit beside me on the bench seat of that truck, barefoot after a day at the lake, laughing because the radio only worked when we hit bumps. I remembered her saying old things had soul. That was before the new houses, the private school fundraisers, the neighborhood women who compared vacation pictures like trophies. Somewhere along the way, she had learned to measure people by polish, and I had stayed the same man she used to admire. That was the quiet part that hurt. People changed slowly, then all at once. She took a sip of tea and glanced at the truck again. "You know, Martin at the dealership said they are running good lease deals this month. You should at least talk to him. Maybe get something respectable." Martin. The name landed softly, but stayed there. Martin Bell worked at Crestline Motors, the biggest dealership on the north side of town, all glass walls, giant flags, and polished SUVs lined up like jewelry under the sun. Rebecca had mentioned him before. Friendly, helpful, successful. Those were her words. I had met him twice. Firm handshake, too much cologne, a smile that never reached his eyes. I asked, "Why are you talking to Martin about my truck?" She shrugged. "Because somebody has to. You keep acting like saving money is a personality." There it was again. The little laugh at the end. Not loud. Not cruel enough for an apology. Just sharp enough to leave a mark. I set the wrench down carefully on the workbench. If I had slammed it, she would have made that the whole story. I had learned over 12 years of marriage that the first person to raise his voice usually loses control of the room. So I did not raise mine. I just nodded once and said, "I will think about it." Rebecca smiled, satisfied, already turning away. "Good. You deserve better," she said. But the way she said it did not sound like kindness. It sounded like correction. When she went back inside, I stayed in the garage until the house. Lights came on one by one. I opened the small cabinet above the workbench and pulled down a blue folder I had not touched in months. Inside were bank statements, investment summaries, a few letters from my late uncle's estate attorney, and one business card with raised black lettering. Crestline Motors acquisition opportunity. Most people in my life thought I was careful because I was afraid of risk. They were wrong. I was careful because when I finally moved, I preferred not to miss. 6 months earlier, I had been approached quietly about a struggling ownership group behind that same dealership. The public saw shiny trucks and weekend sales events. The books told another story. Debt, bad management, a family dispute at the top, a business that looked strong from the road but was cracking under the hood. I had studied those numbers at night, while Rebecca watched home renovation shows and complained about our kitchen cabinets. I had not decided what to do with the opportunity. Not yet. But that evening, standing beside the truck she called embarrassing, I felt the first clean click of something locking into place. Not anger. Not pride. Direction. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting long lines across the kitchen floor where Ethan Parker sipped his black coffee slowly, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant birds outside. The previous day's tension lingered in the air, like a faint scent of ozone after a storm, quiet but persistent. Rebecca moved through the house with her usual efficiency, setting breakfast plates and checking the calendar on her phone, unaware of the careful calculation brewing in Ethan's mind. He glanced at the faded F-150 parked outside, noting how the morning light highlighted every chip in the paint, every dent that told a story of resilience. He remembered the first day he had bought it, the engine purring under his hands like a small promise kept. Now it felt like a relic that the world had mocked, and the same world that had laughed at it would soon see it differently. Ethan opened the blue folder he had pulled from the cabinet last night, flipping through the documents again, letting the numbers sink in. Crestline Motors had not been on his radar for casual investment. It was a chance to step into a world that looked untouchable from the outside, but was malleable to someone who understood engines, management, and timing. The acquisition opportunity was quietly waiting for someone patient enough to read between the balance sheets, to see past the polished showroom floors into the weaknesses that allowed leverage. He sipped coffee again, letting the taste anchor him, thinking about how every negotiation, every contract clause, every boardroom email would be like adjusting the timing on the F-150 engine, each careful tweak creating a precise outcome. Rebecca called out from the living room, "Are you coming to eat?" And he paused, considering the simplicity of that question against the complexity of his plan. "Yes," he said, moving slowly to the table, smiling faintly, the calm mask perfect, because revealing intent too early would spoil the subtle rhythm of patience. The children were already seated, forks poised, the smell of scrambled eggs filling the room, ordinary domestic sounds that contrasted with the extraordinary plan unfolding in Ethan's mind. He focused on the rhythm of the house, the minor movements, the familiar cues that had once brought comfort and now reminded him that he could turn what was ordinary into something remarkable. After breakfast, he excused himself, claiming a small errand at the home office, the room with the computer, filing cabinets, and the quiet space where he had mapped out projects in spreadsheets and diagrams. Sitting down, he opened his laptop, reviewed emails from his attorney, the financial advisor, and the contacts at Crestline Motors. He imagined each conversation, each meeting, as small maneuvers in a larger game that only he knew the rules of. The sense of control was addictive, quiet, a steady pulse of confidence building beneath the calm exterior he showed to the family. Outside, the truck gleamed in the sunlight, old but unbowed, a symbol of persistence, and he let the image stay with him as he drafted emails that balanced cordiality with subtle power, friendly enough to be ignored as ordinary business, but precise enough to start shifting control toward him. By mid-morning, Ethan was making calls, scheduling meetings with the bank, arranging inspections, and quietly asserting himself in the background of a deal that would take weeks, perhaps months, to finalize. Yet even in these practical tasks, he maintained a narrative, a controlled presence that ensured every interaction was measured, every word intentional, each step bringing him closer to the moment where the ordinary would flip into extraordinary. The house hummed with life, Rebecca occasionally calling from another room, her voice light, unaware of the calculations shaping the day, and he answered politely, his tone calm, each word deliberate. It was a rehearsal for patience and presence, the kind of quiet control that built suspense without forcing recognition. As he leaned back in his chair, looking at the light streaming across the floor and catching the edges of the folders and documents, Ethan felt a shift, subtle, a tightening of the focus that told him he was ready for the next move. The F-150 outside, the kitchen smells, the casual movements of family life, all became context for a transformation that was quietly, steadily beginning. He did not rush. He observed. He measured. He waited. And in that waiting, he found a kind of satisfaction in knowing that the ordinary moments of today were the foundation for the extraordinary moments yet to come. By late afternoon, the sunlight had softened, spilling warm amber through the living room windows and casting long shadows across the carpet where the children played quietly, unaware of the undercurrent of calculation that filled the house. Ethan Parker sat at his desk in the home office, leaning back in his chair, eyes fixed on the screen as he reviewed the latest financial statements and correspondence from the attorney representing Crestline Motors. Each line, each figure held significance, a thread in the larger tapestry of opportunity he was carefully weaving. The dealership appeared sleek and imposing in the glossy brochures, yet the reality, hidden behind balance sheets and internal memos, revealed gaps, inefficiencies, and managerial missteps that could be turned to his advantage. He mapped out contingencies, considering every possible obstacle, every unexpected delay, and imagined responses that would keep him in control without tipping his hand prematurely. Outside, the F-150 gleamed faintly, its paint reflecting the golden light, and Ethan allowed himself a brief nod to the symbol it represented: steadfastness, patience, and the quiet accumulation of knowledge and skill that others often overlooked. He ran a hand along the edge of his laptop, feeling the smooth metal, and thought about how he had spent years building expertise quietly, while the world judged only what it saw on the surface. The hum of the computer and the occasional squeak of the office chair became the rhythm of his contemplation, each small sound marking progress in the silent orchestration of a plan that would unfold in stages, careful, deliberate, and invisible to those who measured only appearances. Rebecca moved past the doorway again, asking if he wanted a snack, her tone casual, unconcerned, but he did not respond immediately, letting the question linger in the room as a subtle test of patience and presence. The children's laughter echoed faintly from the playroom, a counterpoint to the steady pulse of his focus, reminding him of what was at stake: not just the acquisition, but the demonstration of capability and vision that had never been recognized in his marriage or by the social circles that had once laughed at the old truck. He opened another folder, this one containing notes on operational improvements, employee structures, and inventory turnover, imagining how each tweak, each adjustment, would ripple through the dealership once under his guidance. The complexity of the task excited him, a precise challenge that required attention, timing, and strategy, and he embraced it fully, savoring the mental clarity it brought compared to the chaotic, casual critiques that had so often stung in the past. The late afternoon light shifted, and he stood, stretching, letting the anticipation of the coming weeks settle into a steady determination, a calm confidence that did not need validation from anyone in the household. Every conversation, every signature, every decision would now be approached with deliberate intent, a silent assertion of capability and foresight that contrasted sharply with the light-hearted judgments he had endured. As he moved back to the window and looked out at the truck, parked loyally in the driveway, he felt the first real surge of ownership, not just over the vehicle, but over the trajectory of the coming months, the transformation of ordinary moments into a measured ascent toward authority and respect. The house remained quiet except for the subtle sounds of domestic life. Each movement of Rebecca, each shuffled footstep, a backdrop against which his inner focus sharpened. He allowed himself one more sip of coffee, the bitter warmth reinforcing the sense of control and the patient rhythm of preparation, knowing that the real test would come not in anger or confrontation, but in the unfolding of actions carefully planned and executed. Each detail, from bank transfers to meetings with the financial advisors, was a piece of the puzzle, a step toward an outcome that would leave no doubt of his acumen. He glanced again at the F-150, at the small scratches and faded paint that spoke of endurance and loyalty, and in that reflection, he saw not just a truck, but the quiet beginning of influence and mastery that had been ignored for far too long. Ethan Parker closed the laptop lightly, leaving the documents organized and ready, and took a deep breath, the steady cadence of the afternoon giving way to a resolve that was patient, intentional, and unshakable, as the ordinary space of the home office became the staging ground for the extraordinary transformation that lay ahead. 3 days later, the first real meeting happened in a conference room that smelled like fresh coffee, polished wood, and expensive caution. Ethan Parker arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a navy button-down shirt, clean jeans, and the same work boots Rebecca had once said made him look like he was always about to fix somebody's sink. He did not dress to impress. He dressed like a man who knew what he could afford to ignore. Across the table sat Daniel Pierce, the attorney handling the ownership dispute, and Marlene Whitaker, a commercial lender with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a folder thick enough to make careless men sweat. The glass walls looked out over a parking lot full of late-model sedans, and beyond that, traffic rolled along the county road in a steady gray ribbon. Ethan set his notebook on the table, uncapped his pen, and waited. Waiting had become one of his strongest skills. Daniel started with polite language, the kind business people use when they want to hide urgency under manners. Crestline Motors was not failing, he explained. It was simply overextended. Inventory costs had risen. Floor plan financing had tightened. The founding brothers were no longer speaking except through lawyers. A new owner with liquidity and operational discipline could stabilize the business quickly. Ethan listened without changing expression. He had heard men call a cracked foundation a settling issue before. Words could wear a suit, but numbers still wore work boots. Marlene slid the statements across the table. Ethan did not rush. He turned each page slowly, making notes in the margin, circling debt service ratios, inventory aging, service department margins, and advertising costs that looked more emotional than strategic. A weaker man might have tried to prove he belonged in that room by talking too much. Ethan did the opposite. He let silence do the heavy lifting. After almost 20 minutes, he looked up and said, "The showroom is not the problem. The service department is carrying the dealership, but nobody is treating it like the engine of the business." Marlene's eyes changed first. Daniel's pen stopped moving. Ethan tapped one line on the report. "Your used truck inventory is overpriced by an average of 18% compared to similar listings within a 75-mile radius. Your turnover is slow because you are chasing image instead of velocity. Your parts ordering is sloppy. Your customer retention after warranty expiration is weak. Whoever runs fixed operations either gave up or was never given authority." The room went quiet in a different way. Not uncomfortable. Alert. Ethan knew that silence. It was the same silence an engine made right. "Before you discovered the real problem." Daniel leaned back and asked, "You have dealership experience?" Ethan almost smiled. "I have experience knowing when something valuable is being wasted." That answer sat there, plain and steady. He did not mention the old truck in his driveway. He did not mention Rebecca's laugh, or Martin Bell's polished grin, or the way neighborhood people measured success by what still had dealer plates on it. Those things belonged to another room, another kind of conversation. Here, only facts mattered. Marlene asked about capital. Ethan opened his folder and laid out proof of funds, estate distributions, investment accounts, and a proposed acquisition structure that kept enough reserves for 90 days of stabilization. Daniel looked at the paperwork once, then again, slower. People often mistook Ethan's quiet life for a small one. They saw a man who drove an older Ford, packed his lunch, fixed his own fence, and bought store-brand coffee when it tasted the same. They did not see the years of saving while other couples upgraded for applause. They did not see the modest rental property he had bought after the market dipped, or the index funds he had fed every month without drama, or the inheritance from his uncle that he had not spent on a lake house, a watch, or a German sedan. Money, to Ethan, had never been a costume. It was leverage. It was protection. It was a tool. And tools were only useful when you knew exactly when to pick them up. By the end of the meeting, the tone had shifted. Daniel no longer sounded like he was presenting an opportunity. He sounded like he was trying not to lose a qualified buyer. Marlene asked careful questions, and Ethan answered each one without decoration. He proposed retaining most employees, auditing vendor contracts, restructuring the used inventory strategy, and rebuilding the service department into the dealership's spine. He wanted the business, but not at any price. That mattered. Desire made people sloppy. Discipline made them dangerous in ways nobody could complain about. When the meeting ended, Daniel shook his hand firmly and said, "We may be able to move faster than expected." Ethan nodded. "Send the revised terms. I will review them tonight." Outside, the air was cool, the sky the color of brushed steel. Ethan walked to his F-150 parked near the back of the lot, between two luxury SUVs that cost more than some starter homes. A salesman smoking near the side entrance glanced at the truck and looked away, already deciding Ethan was not worth a conversation. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. He climbed in, turned the key, and the old engine caught on the second try, rough for half a breath, then steady. On the drive home, his phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Martin says he can get us into something nicer by Saturday. Please do not embarrass me again. Ethan read it at a red light, then placed the phone face down in the cup holder. The light turned green. He drove on, calm as the road ahead, while the first door to everything she never expected began to open. Saturday arrived with a hard blue sky and the kind of bright suburban morning that made every windshield sparkle like a promise. Rebecca was ready before 9, standing near the front door in white jeans, tan sandals, and a pale blue blouse that looked carefully casual. She had the energy of someone preparing for a small victory. I could see it in the way she checked her hair in the hallway mirror, the way she held her phone, the way she kept glancing through the window at my old truck as if it had personally offended her. I came down the stairs in a clean gray shirt and dark jeans, keys in my hand, saying nothing about the revised terms I had reviewed until almost 2 in the morning. She looked me over and sighed like patience was a gift she had been forced to give me. Please be open-minded today, Ethan, she said. Martin went out of his way to make time for us. I nodded once. Open-minded is fine. That seemed to satisfy her, though not completely. On the drive to Crestline Motors, she talked more than usual. She mentioned safety features, resale value, neighborhood impressions, and how people did notice things, whether I wanted to admit it or not. I kept both hands on the wheel and let the road carry us forward. The F-150 hummed along at 55 miles per hour, steady as an old dog that still knew the way home. Every rattle in the dashboard sounded louder with Rebecca beside me. Every faded patch on the hood seemed to glow under her judgment. But beneath all that noise, my mind was quiet. I had spent the previous night reading legal language until the words blurred, then sharpening them again with coffee and discipline. The purchase agreement was not complete yet, but it was close enough to cast a long shadow. Due diligence had accelerated. Financing was lined up. Daniel Pierce had sent the revised structure just after dinner, and Marlene Whitaker had confirmed the lender was comfortable moving forward if the final inspection matched the internal reports. The dealership Rebecca wanted to visit as a customer was already becoming something else in my life. Not a fantasy, not a comeback line, a transaction. And transactions, unlike opinions, left signatures behind. When we pulled into Crestline Motors, giant American flags snapped above the lot, and rows of trucks and sport utility vehicles shined under the sun like they had been polished for a parade. Rebecca sat up straighter before I even parked. There he is, she said, smiling. Martin Bell stood near the showroom entrance in a fitted navy suit, brown shoes bright enough to catch the light, one hand lifted in a wave that looked practiced in a mirror. He was handsome in the dealership way, all confidence, teeth, and monthly payment language. He opened Rebecca's door before I could step around the truck. Rebecca, he said warmly, then looked past her at me. Ethan, glad you made it. His eyes flicked to the F-150, quick as a camera shutter, but I caught it. Men like Martin believed judgment did not count if it happened fast. Rebecca laughed softly. We barely made it. This thing sounds like it is held together by prayer. Martin chuckled, not too loudly, just enough to join her without looking rude. I stood by the driver's door and let the moment breathe. The same heat from that barbecue flickered again, but this time it did not hurt the same way. Pain becomes different when you know something the room does not. Martin led us inside, past glass doors and a reception desk where a young woman greeted him like a minor celebrity. The showroom smelled like leather, tire shine, and fresh coffee. Sunlight poured across polished tile. A black pickup sat on a display platform with a red bow on the hood, ridiculous and expensive. Rebecca touched the door handle like she was touching a future version of herself. Martin started his routine immediately. He talked about horsepower, towing capacity, heated seats, blind spot monitoring, lease incentives, and how a man works hard and deserves to reward himself once in a while. That last part was for me. I could feel it land at my feet. I asked a few questions, not the usual ones. I asked about service retention after the first year, certified pre-owned margins, average inventory age, lender reserve, and whether their floor plan interest had changed since spring. Martin's smile held for the first 2 questions. By the 4th, it had begun to strain. Rebecca turned toward me with that embarrassed look spouses use when they think you are making things awkward on purpose. Ethan, she said lightly, we are not buying the whole place. Martin laughed. A little too fast. No, good questions. You are definitely thorough. I looked at the black pickup, then back at him. I try to be. He guided us toward his office, a glass cubicle with framed sales awards on the wall and a small bowl of peppermints on the desk. Rebecca sat first, crossing one leg over the other, already comfortable in the performance. Martin printed numbers. The monthly payment was high, dressed up in friendly language. He slid the paper toward me and tapped the bottom line with his pen. This would put you in a vehicle that fits the life you have built. Rebecca smiled at that. I looked at the paper for a long moment. Then I looked through the glass wall toward the service department doors, where a technician in a gray uniform walked past carrying a clipboard. That was where the heartbeat was. Not under the bow, not under the lights. Back there, where real work happened. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I took it out and read the message from Daniel Pierce. Final ownership group agreed to your revised offer. Call when free. For a second, the room seemed to narrow into a single bright line. Martin was still talking. Rebecca was still smiling. The numbers sat between us like bait. I placed the phone face down on the desk, calm and careful, and slid the paper back to him. Not today, I said. Rebecca's smile disappeared first. Martin blinked. I stood, smoothing the edge of my shirt. We have a few things to discuss before Saturday ends. Outside, my old truck waited in the lot, dusty and faithful, while the building behind it had just quietly shifted closer to my name. By mid-afternoon, Ethan Parker had returned home, the quiet suburban streets stretching under the summer sun, each mailbox, tree, and lawn a reminder of the familiar rhythms he had built over years. He parked the F-150 in its usual spot, the engine purring softly, as if acknowledging the weight of the day. Rebecca came out onto the porch, holding a glass of iced tea, her posture upright, casual, and yet layered with expectation. She did not speak at first, only watched him as he stepped out of the truck, adjusting his sleeves, hands steady and calm. The moment was small, ordinary in appearance, yet charged with the silent pulse of preparation. Ethan took the folder with the final signed documents from his briefcase and walked toward the porch, letting the paper rest lightly against his chest, the edges sharp and crisp. Every line within represented hours of calculations, negotiations, and patient observation, the kind of work that went unnoticed by those who measured only appearances. He set the folder on the table beside her glass, and she glanced down, curiosity flickering across her face. The children played in the yard, unaware of the tension and anticipation, their laughter like faint music in the background. Ethan leaned against the railing, the sun warming his back, and spoke softly, carefully, as though the words themselves were instruments in a well-rehearsed performance. Rebecca tilted her head, sensing the deliberate calm, but did not respond immediately. He told her, "These are the final agreements. Everything is in place." The tone was steady, confident, and unhurried, a quiet assertion that left space for realization. Rebecca's brow lifted slightly as she processed, her eyes scanning the edges of the folder, following the lines of text, the signatures, the confirmations that turned an idea into action. Ethan's gaze remained calm, anchored to her reaction, noting the micro-expressions, the quick lift of an eyebrow, the faint tightening around her mouth, the brief widening of her eyes. He let each moment stretch, building gravity without raising his voice or forcing recognition. The porch seemed to grow warmer, the sunlight catching the edges of the folder and highlighting the precision of the documents, the subtle authority embedded in every detail. Ethan continued, explaining the structure, the planned transitions, the operational adjustments, the rationale behind each clause, speaking in measured sentences that demonstrated knowledge, preparation, and silent power. Rebecca listened, slowly, each nod and glance reflecting her shifting understanding. The ordinary scene of a weekend afternoon, lemonade in the cooler, the children's sneakers scuffing the deck, contrasted sharply with the extraordinary significance of the papers, the authority they conveyed. By the time Ethan finished, the shift had occurred without ceremony or fanfare. The calmness of his delivery, the completeness of the plan, the quiet evidence of competence and foresight left Rebecca processing her assumptions about him, her judgment tempered by undeniable proof. She stepped back, letting space, as if the realization required distance. Ethan glanced at the F-150, parked faithfully nearby, its worn exterior now a symbol not of embarrassment, but of persistence and foundation, a prelude to the transformation of circumstance into control. The air carried the subtle scent of summer grass, distant traffic, and the faint hum of neighborhood life, each element grounding the moment in realism while the significance of authority and accomplishment quietly asserted itself. He spoke one final time, lightly, deliberately. I will be overseeing the transition personally. The quiet finality in his tone underscored the completion of planning, the readiness for execution, and the calm power of someone who had moved carefully, steadily, and deliberately from observation to action. Rebecca's expression softened, a mixture of surprise, recognition, and the slow acknowledgement that what she had seen for years as ordinary now held unexpected weight. Ethan turned back toward the truck, keys in hand, breathing in the warm air, feeling the silent satisfaction of preparation, patience, and the first true evidence of what had been quietly building, a foundation that would soon be visible to all around him, as ordinary moments of a weekend morning became the starting point for extraordinary change. Monday morning came with a low gray sky and a clean wind pushing leaves across the pavement like small papers nobody had signed yet. I left before the house fully woke, not because I was hiding, but because some moments need silence around them. Rebecca stood at the top of the stairs in her robe, watching me button my cuff and pick up the leather folder from the entry table. She had been quieter since Saturday, moving through the house carefully, as if one wrong word might reveal how much she had misjudged. I did not enjoy that silence as much as I thought I would. Humiliation teaches you to imagine victory as a loud thing, bright and sharp, but real change is quieter. It arrives like a key turning in a lock. I drove the F-150 through the morning traffic, past gas stations, school buses, coffee shops, and lawn crews unloading mowers from trailers. The old truck shuddered once at a stoplight, then settled. I rested one hand on the wheel and let the other tap lightly against the folder on the passenger seat. Inside were the documents that changed everything. Wire confirmation, operating agreement, transfer approvals, transition memo, a neat stack of paper that carried more weight than any showroom speech Martin Bell had ever given. When Crestline Motors came into view, the giant flags were already moving in the wind, snapping hard above rows of polished vehicles. For years, I had driven past that place like everybody else, noticing the shine, the balloons, the big weekend banners promising deals that expired whenever the manager said they did. Now I looked at the building differently, not as a customer, not as a man being measured by his truck, as the person responsible for what happened next. I parked in the same back row as before, between two expensive sport utility vehicles, and sat for a moment after turning off the engine. The silence inside the cab was familiar. A faint smell of vinyl, coffee, dust, and old receipts. I ran my thumb over a scratch near the key ring and smiled once, barely. This truck had carried me here. Not because it impressed anyone, because it endured. Daniel Pierce was waiting near the front entrance with Marlene Whitaker and a man named Howard Briggs, the outgoing general manager whose face looked like it had been awake for too many nights. Howard shook my hand with both of his, nervous but polite. The kind of handshake that asks for mercy without saying the word. I gave him respect because that costs nothing and reveals a great deal. We stepped into the conference room behind the showroom, where the long table had been cleared except for bottled water, legal folders, and a speakerphone. The dealership looked different from this side of the glass. Salespeople moved across the floor with practiced confidence. Reception answered calls. Customers leaned into open doors, touching steering wheels, asking about colors and payments. No one out there knew ownership had shifted beneath their feet while the coffee machine kept humming. That is how business works sometimes. The world keeps smiling while the foundation changes hands. Daniel reviewed the final items. Marlene confirmed the funds. Howard signed the last transition acknowledgement with a pen that trembled slightly near the end. I signed my name in steady blue ink. Ethan Parker. Each letter looked ordinary. That was the strange part. A signature does not glow. It does not announce itself. It just sits there, quiet and legal, while life rearranges around it. When the final document slid into place, Daniel closed the folder and said, "Congratulations. You are officially the majority owner and managing partner." The words landed with no music, no applause, no grand spotlight. Just fluorescent lights, bottled water, and my reflection faintly visible in the glass. Still, something moved through my chest, slow and solid. Not revenge. Not exactly. Recognition. The kind you give yourself when the room finally catches up. Howard asked if I wanted to address the staff immediately. I looked through the glass and saw Martin Bell near a silver pickup, laughing with a couple in golf shirts. He had one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing toward the vehicle like he was presenting a better life. I remembered his glance at my truck. I remembered Rebecca laughing beside him. I remembered the paper he had slid across his desk, telling me what kind of vehicle fit the life I had built. Yes, I said. Let us meet everyone. Howard gathered the staff near the service entrance, where the polished showroom met the concrete honesty of the repair bays. Technicians stood with arms folded. Salespeople whispered. Reception stepped from behind the desk. Martin arrived last, still smiling until he saw me standing beside Howard, Daniel, and Marlene. His expression did not collapse all at once. It changed in small pieces. First the smile thinned. Then his eyes narrowed. Then his shoulders stiffened under that expensive jacket. Howard cleared his throat and announced the ownership transition. He said my name. He explained my role. He called me the new managing partner. The words moved through the room like a quiet electrical current. Some people looked surprised. Some looked relieved. Martin looked at my boots, then my face, then toward the window where the back lot was visible, where my F-150 sat in plain view. I stepped forward, not far, just enough to own the space. I told them nobody was there to tear the place apart. Good work would be protected. Sloppy habits would not. The service department would get investment. Customers would get straight answers. Employees would get clear expectations. No games. No arrogance. No treating people like their worth could be guessed from what they drove onto the lot. That last sentence made the room still. Martin heard it. I knew he did. He lowered his eyes first. Not dramatically, just enough. And in that small movement, the whole week turned over without a sound. By noon, the news had moved through Crestline Motors faster than a summer storm. Across open asphalt. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. A dealership is a living thing, built out of commissions, service tickets, coffee stains, quiet rivalries, and rumors that travel through walls. By 12:30, the finance office knew. By 1, the technicians in Bay 3 knew. By 1:15, the receptionist answered the phone with a little more caution in her voice, as if the building itself had learned to stand straighter. I spent the first half of the day walking the floor, not like a king, not like a man looking for applause, but like a mechanic listening for a strange sound under the hood. I asked names. I asked what was broken. I asked what customers complained about when managers were not around. At first, people gave me polite answers, the kind employees give when they do not know whether honesty is safe. Then one older technician named Earl wiped his hands on a red shop rag and said the parts system was slowing them down by 2 days on simple repairs. After that, the truth came easier. A service advisor admitted they were losing repeat customers because sales promised things service could not honor. A receptionist told me customers hated being transferred 4 times. A younger salesman said the used truck pricing changed so often nobody trusted the numbers by Friday afternoon. I wrote it all down. Not because I wanted to look busy, because listening without recording is just theater. Martin watched from a distance most of the morning. He moved through the showroom with a smile that had lost some of its shine, still shaking hands, still leaning against door frames like the place belonged to him. But every few minutes his eyes found me. I could feel the questions he did not ask. How much did I know? How fast would I move? Was his name on any list? I did not give him the comfort of an answer. Around 2, Howard Briggs brought me a small stack of personnel reports and closed the office door behind him. He looked tired under the fluorescent lights, his tie loosened, his face carrying years of compromises he had probably once called strategy. Martin is our top seller, he said carefully. He produces. I turned a page. He also discounts behind management. Approval, pressures finance to rework terms after customers are emotionally committed, and has the highest complaint rate on the floor. Howard swallowed. He is popular with certain clients. I looked up. Popular is not the same thing as trustworthy. The sentence stayed between us, plain and clean. Howard nodded once because he knew it was true. I did not fire Martin that day. That would have been too easy, and easy decisions can make a man look smaller than the moment. Instead, I scheduled a full process review for the sales team, effective immediately. Transparent pricing. Written approval trails. No more side promises. No more treating customers with older trade-ins like they had wandered in by mistake. No more jokes at someone's expense because their truck had rust near the wheel well. Howard understood. He wrote down every point. When I stepped back onto the showroom floor, Martin was waiting near the coffee station with 2 paper cups in hand. He offered me one. I took it, because refusing would have made the moment louder than it needed to be. "Ethan," he said, voice smooth but thinner than before, "I guess I owe you congratulations." I looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Thank you." He shifted his weight. "I hope Saturday did not come across wrong." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because some apologies arrive wearing raincoats after the roof has already leaked. Saturday came across exactly how it needed to. His face tightened for half a second. "Fair enough," he said. "Rebecca texted me earlier, by the way. Said she heard the news." That was the first time all day my chest moved differently. Not fear. Not jealousy. Just a dull recognition that some people run toward status the way moths run toward porch lights. I set the coffee down on the counter. "Then you should probably keep your replies professional." Martin blinked. I did not raise my voice. I did not lean in. I simply let the words stand there wearing work boots. He nodded slowly. "Understood." At 5:30, I drove home through traffic that glowed gold under the lowering sun. My phone had stayed quiet for almost an hour, which meant Rebecca was preparing what kind of person she wanted to be. When I walked through the door, I knew her patterns. Silence first, then charm, then explanation, then a careful attempt to make the whole thing feel like it had somehow been her idea. The F-150 rolled into our driveway, just as the porch light clicked on. Rebecca opened the door before I reached the steps. She looked different, not in clothing or makeup, but in posture. Softer, smaller somehow. The blue folder sat on the entry table where I had left it, but now it looked like it belonged to the house more than the vase beside it. She said my name quietly. I hung up my keys. The old truck's engine ticked behind me in the driveway, cooling down after another day of doing exactly what it was built to do. Rebecca looked past me toward it, and for once, there was no smirk, no sigh, no polished little joke waiting behind her teeth. "I heard about today," she said. "Martin told me." "Of course he did," I replied. She flinched at the calmness more than she would have at anger. "I did not plan this to embarrass you, Ethan." I turned to her then. "No, Rebecca, you did not plan anything. That was the problem. You judged what you could see and laughed at what you did not understand." Her eyes filled, but she held herself together. I waited, not because I wanted her to break, because for once, I wanted the truth to arrive without me dragging it into the room. She looked toward the driveway again, at the faded truck under the porch light, and whispered, I was wrong. 3 words. Small words. Late words. But true ones, and truth has a sound when it finally stops hiding. I nodded, not forgiving everything, not forgetting anything, just acknowledging the first honest sentence she had given me in a long time. Then I walked past her into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and let the silence settle around us. The house felt ordinary again, but not the same. Ordinary after a storm is never the same. It carries proof in the walls. That night, I did not sleep like a man who had won a fight. I slept like a man who had remembered his own weight.